I'm in Parramatta, which, as every rugby league fan will tell you, is the home of the Parramatta Eels. Except that in the original Aboriginal language, the word Parramatta means home of the eels. So home of the Parramatta Eels actually means home of the eels, which is a taxonomic tautology, as you well knew. Stay with this programme, it's really intelligent.
No prizes for guessing where I'm off to, you already know, Parramatta. Starting at a farm on the outskirts and finishing at old Government House. I'm going to see a man about a pie.
He was a bit of a nutter.
I'll relive a ghoulish colonial crime.
He set fire to her and she was burnt.
And which tragic governor's wife was the Princess Diana of her day.
The doctor arrived, but by the time he got there, she was dead.
Long before Parramatta became a bustling modern city within a city, it was home to the farms and orchards that provided the colony's agricultural lifeline. It was also home to one of Australia's greatest pioneers, here at Elizabeth Farm.
Almost every Australian's heard of Parramatta's most famous son, John MacArthur. He arrived here in 1790 and after some very dodgy dealings became an incredibly successful entrepreneur and visionary. He brought down governors. It was him who brought the merino sheep to Australia. In fact, some people will argue that it was John MacArthur's influence more than that of any other single person that created the New South Wales we know today.
But great success often comes at a terrible price. In John MacArthur's case, it cost him his family, his happiness, and his mind.
This room is kept permanently dark as a symbol of the bouts of black despair that gripped MacArthur throughout his life. His wife said that sometimes he had the enthusiasm of a steam engine and then the next minute he would plunge into depression. Nowadays, I suppose we'd say he was a bit bipolar. But what we do know is that in the year 1832, when he heard the news that his son had died, something inside him snapped. His thin veneer of sanity gave way to a violent dementia, and anyone who's had to deal with that knows how terrifying it can be. He shouted, he swore, he drew his pistols and his sword. The loving husband and father became a complete paranoid. As far as he was concerned, his two daughters had been stealing from him, their governess was absolutely despicable, and as for his wife, Elizabeth, who he'd been with for 40 years, who'd borne him 9 children, who'd been his rock and his inspiration, now she was nothing but a filthy adulteress, and he banned her from Elizabeth Farm forever.
It was a tragic split made worse by the fact that during John's long overseas trips, Elizabeth had managed the farm, overseen the developing merino wool flocks, and helped build the family fortunes. Elizabeth was John's partner in business and in life.
And eventually, together, they created a family empire, which to this day still leaves its mark across New South Wales.
Right, I'm now heading for town along the leafy shores of the Parramatta River.
Hi, mate.
How you doing, bud?
All right, you must have just about the best view in Parramatta.
Yeah, it's not bad. I got the wire fence instead of the wooden one, you know?
You don't ever go swimming in there, do you?
Oh, yeah, every summer I swim across there and back. You know, it's not so bad. Nothing to worry about except for a couple of bull sharks.
Blimey, I never thought you'd get bull sharks up here. I'll see you, mate. Have a good day.
See you later.
Must be 24k from the sea. Long swim for those sharks.
Long swim for people too, which is why boats have been plying the Parramatta River for more than 200 years.
Take a look at that. That's a ferry, hi everybody, called the River Cat, an exquisite boat. It's going down the Parramatta River, which used to link Port Jackson, what later became Sydney, with here. They didn't have the River Cat in the 1830s, though. Take a look at that. This ship is called the Experiment. It was literally horse-powered. As you can see, there's 4 horses there trotting round in a circle. And they've powered a drive shaft, which in turn drove those paddles. But unfortunately, it didn't work very well because the horses didn't like having to go round and round. You can't blame them, really, can you? And eventually, they just stopped, and the boat got out of control and drifted practically out to sea, after which they shut the business down pretty quickly, making it, as far as we know, the only horse-powered ship ever in Australia. Tell you what, this is turning into really rather a nice day.
Nice day or not, there's no time for dawdling. We've got a deadline to meet, a ferry to greet, and maybe even something to eat.
Hi. Oh, wow, you've got pies. Look, 2 pies. This is perfect. Not quite now, because, well, if you wouldn't mind, I want to tell you a story about the Flying Pieman who operated around here. Does anybody know about the Flying Pieman? What? Oh, 3 or 4 people. Do you know his name?
Yes.
Go on.
William Francis King.
William Francis King, spot on, absolutely. And I hope you won't mind me saying this, but he was a bit of a nutter. He came out here in the early part of the 19th century. He started walking around. He was dressed in stripy trousers, really brightly coloured shirts, top hats with little bits flying off them. And he had this weird thing, and that's why your pies are so brilliant. He would go down to Sydney, to Circular Quay, and there would be the ferry up to Parramatta there, and he would sell everybody pies, 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 hot pies, hot pies. Anyway, they'd all eat their pies, and then he would walk really, really fast all the way back to Parramatta. He would get there before the ferry, so those same people, when they come off like you'd get a second pie. You're doing ever so well on that pie.
I'm ready for another one.
But that's what he started doing. He would do the Parramatta to Sydney walk twice a day for 6 days. Became very, very famous. He went up to Brisbane and walked down to Ipswich, which is 70 miles, and he did that in 16 hours. He was the great walking celebrity of Australia, the Flying Pieman. But then, sadly, he walked himself out. And at the age of 66, scarily the same age as the person who's talking to you now, he died. Goodbye.
Funny, all that talk of pies and piemans made me hungry.
I had to come down here to Wigram Street. The smells are just so intoxicating. Indian food everywhere. There's about 3 Indian restaurants down there, 2 there, and an Indian shop. Huge restaurant here.
It's called Little India, and it seems to me to be a sign that Parramatta is really reinventing itself.
Do you always eat Indian food, or do you have the occasional hamburger?
Yeah, we do have the occasional hamburger, but we prefer Indian food because, I don't know, I like Indian
Well, you'd have
food.
to say that with your dad here, wouldn't you? You're a real Australian girl, aren't you?
Yeah.
Can I have a little nibble before I go? So, would take the chop, wouldn't I? That's all right. Oh, man, that is really good. Thank you. That is so lovely. Beautifully cooked. Do you mind if I pinch my chop and go on my way?
Have some more, please.
Well, there's enough for now. Cheers, guys. Bye.
Parramatta's rapidly becoming a multicultural hub. You can see it in the faces and the landscape and feel the energy on the street. It's always been a bit of a melting pot, although it wasn't always harmonious, especially back when the Reverend Samuel Marsden ruled the roost here at St John's Cathedral.
And if that name seems a bit familiar, it's probably because he was also known as the flogging parson.
You see, Marsden was a magistrate as well, and he wasn't above handing out the odd brutal flogging to the convicts, particularly Irish rebels.
Now, in a way, it's understandable because at that time, the whole colony was terrified of insurrection, which they thought would probably be orchestrated by the Irish prisoners. But he does seem to have been very, very heavy-handed. Nevertheless, there must have been another side to him, which is epitomised by this beautiful baptismal font. Come and have a look at it. As you can see, it's inlaid with PowerShell, so yes, it's from New Zealand. Why in this Australian church? Well, eventually he got fed up with the convicts and the Aborigines and decided that he would go to New Zealand and preach there. And he was incredibly successful, so much so that he's now cited by the New Zealanders as having been one of the most influential Europeans in New Zealand in the whole of the 19th century. And eventually the Maori carved this font in remembrance of him and gave it to this church. Although I suspect that if any descendants of those early Irish convicts came here and saw this, they would describe him in rather different terms.
Today I'm in Parramatta for a walk on the west side. I've explored the dark secrets of a pioneering farmer, jumped on board with an eccentric pieman, and been to church with a flogging parson. Trust me, there's more where that lot came from. I'm on the other side of the river now, in Prince Alfred Park.
Right, here we go again. A bit more of the old nonsense. Citizens of Parramatta, what a fantastic day it is today.
To tell the story of the man they hanged twice.
What an old tart I am. Right, here we go. This is the year 1807, OK? And there was a woman called Mary Smith, and she lived in Sydney, and she had a load of her stuff nicked, her clothes, and she came up to Parramatta because she thought that this guy, whose name was John Kenny, had nicked her stuff. And he says, yes, you are absolutely right, I did steal your clothes, but don't worry, because tomorrow morning, first thing, we will go down to the pawn shop and retrieve your clothes. And she agreed to spend the night at his house. Some might say a very foolish move on her part, as indeed it was, because during the night, he grabbed the poor woman, he threw her down, he hit her several times, but still she did not die, she didn't die, until he dragged her into the hearth, he set fire to her, and she was burnt to death. And next morning, her body, it's all right, it was a long time ago. Next morning, her body was discovered by a landowner only about 100 metres away. They then realised that there was just cause to call the police, and they arrested him and they took him back to Sydney. And he was tried, and the judge said, "You have committed a crime, John Kenny, so against the spirit of human beings in this colony that you will not only be hung here in Sydney, but then your body will be taken down, you will be taken to Parramatta, and you will be hung once again as an example to the people of Parramatta." And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the story. And it happened right here under your feet. Or at least he was hung above your heads, wasn't he? But you know what I mean. Thank you very much.
Cracking tale, isn't it? But I'm not quite done yet.
Can I squeeze in?
Sure.
Thank you very much.
Hello.
We've never met before, have we?
No, that's right.
Tell me who you're related to.
My 5 times great uncle was John Kenny.
And you just turned up here today?
Yes.
That's brilliant.
I was just walking through and
I've just been rubbishing him for the last 10 minutes.
yes, I've noticed this.
How do you feel about it?
Oh, I'm fine, because it's been a while. We've lived here forever and we've come the full circle because my great-grandfather was the governor of the jail down the road here.
You're joking?
No.
Well, that's such a typical Aussie story, isn't it? From convict to the governor of the jail.
Yeah.
You two aren't related to anyone really famous and no murderer or anything?
I wouldn't know because My ancestors come from Sri Lanka, who knows?
Well, cheers, lovely to meet you. That was quite extraordinary. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm getting the impression that Parramatta has a fine tradition of rogues, and they're not just confined to the colonial era.
In 1981, at the Sydney Cricket Ground, the Parramatta Eels played the Newtown Jets in the Rugby League Grand Final, and they won. That was pretty memorable, but it was when they got back here to their own ground that something happened that every fan would remember for the rest of their lives.
Back then, there was no flash Parramatta Stadium, just the rather, let's face it, shabby Cumberland Oval. Obviously, the triumphant Eels fans felt they deserved something better, so they took matters into their own hands.
So what happened?
Someone set light to the stadium.
That's terrible.
I know. And here I am laughing about it.
Nobody was killed.
Oh, no, nothing, not at all, not at all. And so people just moved back and watched it burn. Some of them were saying, let it burn.
As the old stadium went up in flames, Judith's dad snatched one final souvenir.
He ran off with a paling, a picket, from the picket fence. And
You're
ran
joking. Ran away with it.
He did. And they've still got it at home.
Come on, show me. What does it say?
Paling from fence, Cumberland Oval, grand final night, September the 27th, 1981. Alf, Betty, Eric, Eileen, my parents, sat close by here, many a happy hour.
What a disgraceful family you are. Laughing at the stadium burning and then looting it. Thank you for sharing that with me.
Thanks
Thanks for the story. Bye-bye.
Funny, if Judith had been convicted of stealing offences 200 years earlier, she might have ended up at my next destination just up the road, the ominously named Female Factory.
This is what the female factory would have looked like in the 1820s. Very interesting room just there. It was a meeting room, and it's where men would come who were on the lookout for wives from among the female prisoners who were getting near to the end of their sentence. Over there, that was the hospital. In other words, that was the first female health service in the entire colony. And behind us, up there, was the dormitories. That building was knocked down in the 1880s, but you can still see remnants of it in that bell and the clock there being incorporated into that later tower. So you can see that although there have been a lot of changes, there are echoes, shadows of that original 1820s building still all around today.
The female factory was designed as a safe haven for vulnerable convict women. But the conditions were so bad and their treatment so appalling, well, something had to give, didn't it?
Tell me about the riot.
Right, well, riot is a question in itself. If you're looking from above, perhaps it's a riot. But for the women, it was about a workers' action.
Yeah, let's call it workers' action.
Yes, I think we should. It was a point where the women were fed up. There was corruption here. They weren't being treated well. They didn't like what was happening in terms of the head shaving punishments and also the yoking. So what they decided was they'd had enough. And when Matron Rain cut the rations, there was a mini riot on the Wednesday. They threw out a constable, and that was sort of the beginning of what was to come.
2 days later, the angry, starving women grabbed their pickaxes, broke down the doors and busted out of the joint. They rampaged through the town, grabbing any food they could find. 3 days later, 40 of them were still on the run.
And the local newspapers were calling it like bees out of a hive, an Amazonian banditti.
So tell me about the Spartacus moment. That's my favourite part of this story.
The Spartacus moment, well, when the women did come back, eventually most of them came back. They were lined up, and Major Lockyer, who was head of the constabulary at the time, said, I want to get the ringleaders and I want to put them in their cells. And all the women that were there said, no, we're standing together. And I think that's really part of the Australian character.
I am Spartacus, I am Spartacus.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
You know, if you're searching for the genesis of the true Aussie character, I reckon you don't have to look much further than those early convict women. They were a right feisty bunch.
You get a glimpse of that in some of the court reports. There was this woman called Anne Mullins who was allowed out on a Sunday to visit her child for 1 hour, but she got back 8 hours later and was taken to court. And this is what she said to the court. My name is Anne Mullins, and no mistake. A better washerwoman never stood at the tub or made soap lather. I'm a trump. Can anyone here say that I am not? No, no. I've been a good servant, and for that, dirt has been thrown in my teeth. And then it says, the bench, having duly weighed the case, sent the offender to third class for 14 days. Don't you just hate authority sometimes?
It's my first time in Parramatta, and I've really enjoyed myself. I knew it would throw up some surprises, but not a seaside getaway.
I'm just below the female factory now, and this place is affectionately known as Little Coogee. It's named after Coogee Beach, just south of Bondi. And in the 1930s, it would have been jam-packed full of holiday makers who were trying to get the beach experience, even though they were, 25k from the sea. And the great Australian swimmer, Fanny Durack, who won Olympic gold and broke a dozen world records, and she used to power her way up and down here in training. And now all that's gone, all the excitement, all the glamour, and it's just sort of reverted to nature. You caught anything yet?
Pretty quiet.
Very quiet.
I could spend an entire afternoon strolling through the open spaces of Parramatta Park, but I'd rather head to Old Government House to tell you the tragic tale of Lady Fitzroy.
This story begins in December 1847, when Governor Fitzroy and his wife decided that they wanted to take their coach down to Sydney for a wedding. And they took with them their aide-de-camp, Charles Masters, more of whom later, and the footman. They didn't have their coachman because he'd resigned a couple of weeks previously. But Governor Fitzroy didn't worry about that. He thought he was a pretty good rider, maybe a bit flash, but... Excuse me. Would you mind if I borrow your bike just for a couple of minutes for this show, this TV show?
Okay.
Thank you, that's very kind of you. Yeah, Charles was quite confident about riding the coach himself and being in control of the horses. He thought he was a pretty good rider, a bit flashy maybe, but good nevertheless. You may be wondering, by the way, why I'm not wearing a bike helmet. That's because this is no longer a bike, it is now a coach. So if you'd like to be my outriders and follow me, I'll show you what happened. As soon as he took control of the reins, whoa, the horses raced away from him. Now, he'd got a real big problem, which was that they'd bolted and he had two options. Either he could try and pull them back, in which case anything might kick off, or else he could just let them run and let themselves tire themselves out, and he chose the latter course, which would have been all right if the path had been absolutely straight, but unfortunately there was a kink at the end of it with a lot of oak trees there, and he was running out of road, and Lady Mary was standing up in her seat shouting and screaming, and the footman was trying to grab her and yank her towards the back of the coach so she wouldn't be hurt. But then the bend came and whack, the coach hit the trees. Lady Mary was thrown out. She lay there bleeding through her nose and out of her mouth, and it was 6 or 7 minutes before the doctor arrived, but by the time he got there, she was dead. And although the footman and the governor were okay, Charles Masters was dead too. It was a terrible, terrible accident. Thank you for the loan of your bike, by the way. That's very kind of you. Cheers. Have a good afternoon. This is the exact spot where Lady Fitzroy died, and as you can see, there's not just an obelisk, but there's an oak tree planted here to remind us of the cause of her death. But that's not the end of the story. 2 days later, the funeral took place, and it was a real Princess Di moment. She was a very popular woman. Over 4,000 people turned up. But there was one notable absentee, her husband. Why didn't he come? Well, some people say it was just that he was so broken-hearted. Others that he feared the opprobrium of the crowd who might blame him for the death of his wife. But there's another possibility. It's said that Mary Fitzroy and Charles Masters were secret lovers and that her husband couldn't bear the thought of them being buried side by side.
That's my walk. And this is when I say it's great that Parramatta is rediscovering its history and bringing its culture back to life.
And yeah, of course that's true, but I've discovered another Parramatta that really fascinates me, and it's right here. It's young, it's vibrant, it's ambitious, it's multicultural. You're from Iran, aren't you?
Yep.
And I reckon this place has got the kind of energy that's going to drive Australia forward over the next 50 years. So cheers to the old Parramatta and double cheers to the new one. Cheers. Where better to build the capital of the state of Victoria than right here, with its beautiful bay and its fantastic views and its tree-lined shores. The Wattarung people called it Geelong, the place of the seabird over the white cliffs. Lovely. Of course, it isn't the capital of Victoria, but it might well have been if it hadn't been for a quirk of nature over there. Come on, I'll tell you all about it.
Geelong. So I'm starting and finishing by the water. I'm going to see a racing man about a legendary horse.
This is where they hid it?
Yeah.
A gentleman bushranger about an uncooperative mount.
Excuse me, I hope you don't mind me doing this.
And a cafe crowd about a misleading map.
It's ridiculous, isn't it?
Sooner or later, I'll end up in jail.
Back in the 1840s, there were two big towns in Victoria, Geelong and Melbourne, and they were both very successful, so either of them could have become the capital, but Geelong had a real problem. Do you see over there, there's a promontory, and off it there was a huge sandbar which made it virtually inaccessible to big ships. Now, if the government of the day had been prepared to cut through it, then maybe Geelong would have ended up as the capital. But they didn't, and it lost.
It may not have been given the captain's armband, but Victoria's second largest city was, and still is, an important player in the state's economy.
That's the Yarra Street Pier, and this is what it would have looked like round here in the late 19th century. Lots of noise, lots of commerce, lots of ships. In fact, at that time, Geelong was the pivot of trade between the goldfields and Melbourne, and people around here were really proud of that fact. But by the 1980s, the pier had been burnt down, and now there isn't a hint of it left in the landscape. Well, maybe there is just one hint. Look at these, they're great, aren't they? They were actually made from salvaged timber from the pier. Got a sailor here, just ashore by the look of his duffel bag, chatting up a rather dodgy-looking young lady with cute little pink knees. Wonder how she got those. Some more over there. Hey, there's some lifeguards here who's carrying a rather extraordinary-looking duck there. Another one. This one's got a black eye. Excuse me, did you make these?
I did make them. I helped Jan Mitchell, a local artist in Geelong, make them.
The late Jan Mitchell was a primary school artist in residence when she came up with the idea of the bollards in 1994.
Was she a bit of a character, she looks like?
She was a character, and she always put a lot of quirky things into the groups of bollards that we did. There's always another story behind them. And
look, there's... What I can see here is a rather cute little grey bum and a little fluffy tail. What's that all about?
Well, that's a rabbit, and the rabbits were introduced in Winchelsea, nearby to Geelong.
Oh, there was only 24 or so of them, wasn't it?
That's right.
They turned into millions.
That's right. Now we've got rabbits everywhere. And the rabbits will be on any of the bollards that the history is after 1859.
Which is when the rabbits were introduced?
That's right.
So how many more of these bollards are there?
There's 106 around the foreshore, and we're in the middle right now.
Oh, great. Well, I'll go and see if I can find some more.
Yeah.
And some more rabbits.
Have a look for the rabbits.
Thanks a lot. You see, there's another rabbit down here. It's great, isn't it? It's a fantastic way to tell Geelong's history. Better than me. And look at that, in memory of our friend Gary Dutchy Redveld and his crewmates who gave their lives fighting the Linton bushfire, 2nd of December 1998. That's nice, isn't it?
Glorious sunny day, I'd love to stop here at Eastern Beach Baths, which were built in the 1930s and then lovingly restored in the 1990s. But this is a walk, not a swim. Besides, there's something I want to show you up the hill.
If you want a really glorious piece of Geelong architecture, take a look at this. Careful crossing the road. Corio Villa. Isn't it fantastic? See the great big tower behind the tree, and then you've got this huge great veranda here with all this lovely tracery on those columns. But the odd thing about it is, it wasn't built here. It's a prefab. It was made in Edinburgh, ordered by some bloke who lived over here. But by the time it got here, he died. It was left on the quayside for 6 months, and then it was bought by someone else, and they erected it here, apparently without any instructions. So I wouldn't be surprised if there was a bit left over at the end, would you? Look, there's even a coat of arms at the top there. No wonder they call it the wedding cake house. Huh.
I'm heading out of town to sniff out a racing mystery. But first, I need to show you a couple more of Geelong's houses.
It's an intriguing, compact, little mock Gothic Victorian house there, isn't it? It's a bit incongruous amongst all these bungalows. But it's actually, this is a gatehouse, and beyond that there would have been not a double garage like there is now, but a posh house, which is where I'm going right now. This is it. Here's the homestead, St Albans Homestead. Built in 1873. It's a beautiful building, isn't it? And it would have been set in colossal grounds. I've just walked, something like 400 metres up from the gatehouse, and none of these bungalows would have been here. They would all have been part of the grounds for this house, and you can imagine it being full of local dignitaries and foreign dignitaries and politicians, maybe even royalty, and members of the racing fraternity, because in the late 19th century, this was one of the most important studs in Australia.
But one famous racehorse to grace St Albans wasn't bred here. His short stay was one of Australian racing's best-kept secrets.
Michael.
Tony, how are you?
All right, mate. Listen, in 1930, you had a rather special guest here, didn't you?
Yes, we had Farlap, the winner of the 1930 Melbourne Cup, come here.
Who was the most celebrated racehorse of his generation?
Absolutely. He was a freak, an absolute freak.
Farlap, Big Red to his fans, was a hero to most Australians during the Depression. I say most, because a few days before the 1930 Melbourne Cup, someone tried to kill the red-hot favourite as he was being walked along a suburban street.
A car pulled up alongside Farlap and a couple of villains were in the back seat and produced a shotgun and had a crack at the horse. They missed.
So incompetent villains.
Very incompetent.
But scary nevertheless. And then he was going to go on to take part in the Melbourne Cup.
Which was on the Tuesday.
Well, that jockey must have been nervous.
Well, the jockey wasn't there at the time, but they did ring him up later on and tell him that they were going to get him next.
This is the jockey for the next race?
Yeah, that's what Jim Pike. And he said, well, that's pretty good, mate. You can't even hit a bloody horse, so how are you going to hit a little bloke like me? Let's go and have a look.
Still, Farlap's owners were taking no chances. The champ was whisked away to St Albans in the dead of night.
This is where they hit him?
In here, yeah.
Let's have a look at that.
It's a bit worse for wear at the moment, but that's where he was, in there.
And it wasn't much better for his minders.
They didn't have an ensuite, did they?
No, it was pretty rough, but it certainly did the job. Farlap was in there, the guys were camped in here, and they were on guard, protecting him, and everything was snug as a bug in a rug, so to speak.
There were still problems, though?
They got ready to come to Melbourne. Some extra coppers arrived with motorbikes and what have you, and a full escort, the whole deal, loaded him up, and the truck wouldn't start. And they cranked and cranked and cranked this rotten thing. It wouldn't start. An hour later, it leapt into life, and they got to Melbourne in the nick of time. They had to put the race timing back a bit to allow them enough time to get into the race course.
And it all worked out well in the end?
It did. He went and won the Melbourne Cup.
Yay.
Very much so.
Well, thank you for that. I like stories with a happy ending.
Well, I do too. Thanks, Tony.
There's another great Melbourne Cup story that belongs to a lad called Peter St Albans, who was born here in about 1865.
A decade or so later, it was the Melbourne Cup, and the jockey riding a horse called Briseis couldn't make the weight. So the owner said to little Peter, would you ride Briseis? And the little boy said, yeah, fine. And he told the authorities he was 13. He was actually only 11. He got on the horse, he rode the Melbourne Cup, the most celebrated horse race in the whole of Australia, and he won comfortably. But the charming part of the story is that apparently he went into school the next day and his teacher said, Peter, why weren't you here yesterday? And he said, oh, I was riding the Melbourne Cup and I won. Although whether the teacher actually believed him or not, history doesn't record.
Today I'm discovering what makes Geelong tick. I've talked to a load of old bollards at the waterfront, found a fabulous prefab mansion, and mucked about in the one-star hideout of a four-legged legend. And now it's time to do some time.
Do not pass go, do not collect $200.
During World War II, Geelong Jail was a military prison. And one day, some of its inmates decided to become outmates.
Excuse me, are you the tour guide?
That's me.
Would you mind if I hijack your group for a second? This is about the Great Escape. You know about the Great Escape from here?
I know a little bit about it.
The year was?
1945.
Absolutely correct. 1945, 21st of July, 22 prisoners break out of here into the yard. Would you do that for me?
Oh,
off you go. Break out, break out. That's through that door there, that's it. This presumably is where the prison guard would have been. I hope he doesn't mind if I, thank you, borrow his hat. So he saw what was happening and rang through to his superiors. Bring, 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 bring. Nothing happened. Bring, 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 bring. Still nothing happened. Bring, 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 bring. He hadn't realised that the prisoners had actually cut the telephone lines before they escaped. OK, let's go. That's great. Hang on, one sec. I nearly couldn't catch up with you. Obviously, you didn't want to spend the rest of your lives in the exercise yard. You had to get over the outside wall. So you started looking around for bean cans and jam cans. This is the wall. So off you go, over to here. And you were looking for ladders as well, scaling ladders to get over the wall. But while that is happening, the guard inside the prison is going, bring, 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 bring. Nothing's happening, bring, 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 bring. Until eventually another guard hears about the escape because someone outside has seen all the kerfuffle going on. And then really the poo hits the fan. Suddenly there's police, there's guards, there's everyone everywhere. And you've escaped over the wall by this time. We'll go this way. Hooray! Freedom! Free! But why Are you standing still cheering outside of the prison? Off you go in all directions. Fan out. That's right. It was, in fact, a footy day, and Geelong were at home, so there's a huge crowd around, and they just disappeared into the crowds, and nobody could find them. Excuse me, you're the tour guide, weren't you? Right. Desperately looking for your
I was escaping.
tour. What's your name?
Brian.
Brian, I understand that they couldn't be caught there and then. Apart from anything else, they couldn't fire on them, could they? They weren't allowed to do that, and they disappeared into the crowd. But why were so few of them caught later on?
Well, because the war was coming to an end.
Yeah.
And they're prisoners of the army, not of the government.
Yeah.
So once the war ended, therefore, they just got away with the whole thing and they just dissolved back into the community.
And in fact, the war ended about a month later, didn't it?
Absolutely.
So they fell into this kind of bureaucratic abyss and avoided both the civilians and the army.
Absolutely, that's correct.
So they could still be out there, couldn't they?
Well, they could be.
Somewhere.
They probably are.
Well, it would be lovely if they wrote in, wouldn't it, after this programme?
Well, we'd very much like to see them come back, yes.
I don't think they will. Do you, somehow?
We won't keep them in here.
Anyway, you better see if you can get your tour back. Sorry about that.
Thanks very much.
Oh,
thank you.
Here's your hat.
Thank you very much.
I've done my time in jail. Let's see what I can dig up on Sydney Avenue.
You know the Brownlow Medal, don't you? Even I know the Brownlow Medal for the best and fairest player in the AFL each year. Well, this is the house where Charles Brownlow actually lived. Is it the best house in the street? Is it the fairest? Is it the second best? Is it the third best? Shall we all vote and then put our votes in an armoured vehicle? Do I have a gorgeous wag on my arm? No, I don't. But it is a gorgeous little house, isn't it? That's one of the reasons I love doing walks like this. OK, I'm heading off into town now, and... Oh, hang on a bit, there's a minor crisis going on. Whoa! Sorry, that was our fault.
Thank you.
Where's your vehicle?
Over here, actually.
Ah, that is very interesting. Two products, both of which were invented in Geelong.
Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, you know about the Ute, don't you? Ford Motor Company of Geelong. Farmer's wife writes to them and says, I need a vehicle that will drive me to church on Sunday and keep the pigs in on Monday. Everybody knows about that. But what about this stuff? Any ideas? Well, it's not, I mean, to be honest, it's not actually ice. It's refrigeration, or a kind of refrigeration. There was a bloke called James Harrison who was a journalist who actually started the Geelong Advertiser. And when he used to clean his typeface, he realised that the liquid that he used, which was sulphuric ether, made the typeface cold. And he thought, sulphuric ether, cold, why don't I tip this stuff into a refrigerator? And he did, and it was incredibly successful. And he sold his fridges, not just here in Australia, but in South America and Europe, Britain. So, two great products from one fantastic town.
Very interesting.
Thank you. You're not off for a party tonight?
Yeah, party, watching the football.
Have a good night. Cheers. Bye.
Now, where was I? Oh yes, heading down into the city centre and back to the days of the 1850s gold rush.
There was a highwayman working around here called Captain Melville, who was probably a violent savage, but he sort of cultivated the reputation as very genteel, a sort of Robin Hood type character. For instance, on the 19th of December 1852, he held up two miners who were coming into Geelong, took 33 quid off them, and then gave them a tenner back so they could enjoy Christmas.
But Melville's career was about to come to an inglorious end in what's now a tucked-away little corner of Geelong's CBD.
Yeah, this is the exact place I'm looking for, McClarty Place, because a week later, on Christmas Day, Melville is in a brothel at the end of this street. Presumably the brothel was right down there where it says keep driveway clear at all times, and you can imagine he was sitting around with all the riff-raff celebrating his exploits, and predictably very soon they ran out of brandy, so they sent one of the women who worked there out to get some more. But she didn't. In fact, she went to the police and told them what was happening at the brothel, so they raced over there, burst in, and Captain Melville started firing at them, and he escaped through that gate there, and ran off down Mallop Street, except unfortunately I can't get this gate open, so I'll have to run around the other way. That's Mallop Street over there, so he came down this way, all guns blazing, into Johnston Park, and ahead of him he saw a horse. Excuse me, I hope you don't mind me doing this. And he tried to mount it, but it bolted. So he was basically kind of stuck, and then a local bystander brought him to the ground, and the police surrounded him, and that was basically it. He was captured and taken off. And there's actually a plaque to celebrate that event here in the park. It's not that extraordinary triangular thing there. That's for a local service organisation. It's not even for this, which is about the Belcher Fountain. It's not even, I have to say, about this, Latrobe's Dam here. But right at the bottom there, it says, it was near this spot on the 25th of December 1852 that the bushranger, Captain Melville, was captured. That's a little recognition, isn't it?
Walking around Geelong, I can't help but wonder what it would be like today if it had become the state capital all those years ago. Mind you, I think people in Melbourne would have done just about anything to make sure it didn't happen.
Ladies and gentlemen, could I prevail on you to do something for me? But before I do, are most of you from Geelong?
Yes.
Yes,
I want to, 99%. What do you reckon that the attitude of Melbourne people is towards you guys?
Well, they push us around. They think they're so much more superior.
They're just horribly jealous we've got the best football team, keep kicking their backside.
Well, you know, in the 19th century, I think that was true as well. But I think the reason was really through insecurity, and I'll demonstrate that if I may. Could you draw a map for me? Have you got napkins over there? Could you draw for me Geelong, Ballarat and Melbourne, just the relationship between the three of them, a little map, yeah? Right, let's have a look, Yeah, you've all drawn them pretty equidistant, haven't you? You've got, there we are, Geelong, Ballarat, Melbourne.
All this primary school map making is because back then the Melbourne business classes felt threatened by Geelong's financial and commercial clout. With an unprecedented flood of visitors now flocking to the Victorian goldfields, they came up with a piece of cartographical chicanery to feather their own nests.
And this is the map that they drew up in Melbourne. Can you see where Geelong is? Practically in Tasmania. Can you see that? It's ridiculous, isn't it? And as you can imagine, the people in Geelong were outraged by this, and there was a politician called James Strawn, and he said, in this map, Ballarat is made to appear twice the distance from Geelong that it is from Melbourne, whereas the real distance of that township and its goldfields is only 48 miles in a straight line from Geelong, and by the same mode of measurement, 62 miles distant from Melbourne. In other words, Melbourne is further away. Well, you wouldn't know that from that map. That is the kind of attitude that those people had towards you then. And that is the kind of attitude that you perpetuate today.
Never.
Anyway, thanks ever so much.
Thank you.
Nice to meet you all.
I'm coming to the end of my journey around Geelong, and I've uncovered two shocking secrets. You see, I'm not the only well-known person who's ever walked these streets, and I'm definitely not the fastest.
In the year 2006, the final of the 50-kilometre race walking championships was held in Geelong, and the finishing line was right here on the waterfront, and it was won by a bloke from Geelong, which is why I've asked these people to help me demonstrate that glorious moment. Could you do me a favour? Could you go right up by the carousel?
Yes,
and when I say ready, steady, go, start timing.
I will.
Have you got that?
Yes.
You're all right with your watch there? It's all recorded on this plaque here. Nathan Deeks recorded 3 hours, 35 minutes and 47 seconds to break the previous world record. But above, it says, could you walk from here to the carousel, that's just down there, in 39 seconds? That's how fast you would have to go to keep up with world champion race walker Nathan Deeks. Can we keep up with the world championship? Yeah. Do you reckon? Yeah. On your marks, get set, go!
I always thought of race walking as a whole bunch of very fit people seeing who can not run the fastest.
Oh, you're flagging!
But I'm suddenly gaining a whole new respect for them.
I think the dog's doing it easiest, don't you?
We're trying to walk about 200 metres in 39 seconds and struggling. Can't imagine trying to do it continually for 50 Ks. My well-honed technique.
Yes!
What?
55!
55 seconds! Not quite 39, but...
Not quite 39.
What can I say? You guys were rubbish. And I was great, the champion! Yay! Thank you! Thanks, bye.
I reckon that walk around Geelong would take you a whole day. Unless, of course, you were Nathan Deeks.
I've just about come to the end of my walk now. The sea baths are a couple of hundred metres down in that direction, so I've sort of come full circle. These two bollards represent the indigenous people who, of course, were here for thousands of years before the Europeans arrived. I wonder what this little lad would have thought of present-day Geelong. Would he be amazed by its shopping malls and its football mania and its beautiful seafront? Would he still think of it as the place of the seabird over the white cliffs? I'm in the Northern Territory, deep in the heart of the outback. If I wanted to go to the seaside, I'd have to travel at least 1,000 kilometres in any direction. That is, if I didn't die of thirst in the desert first. What isolation! Except there's a town here, and this town used to be the hub of Australia's communications. Every word that left the continent passed through here. Must have some stories to tell, mustn't it? It's called Alice Springs, by the way. Come on. Furthest away is probably about 1,200 kilometres.
Play bathtub jockey to some river runners.
They've collapsed, we're winning!
And uncover a tiny piece of outback USA.
It really was secret, wasn't it?
Yeah, they'd say, what do you do out there? Oh, we're a weather research station. Yeah.
In the first half of the 19th century, Australia was virtually cut off from the rest of the planet. For instance, if you wanted to send a letter to the UK, it would take the best part of half a year and another half year to get the message back. So in 1870, a private company said that they would lay a telegraph cable under the ocean from Java down to Darwin, provided that the South Australian government would lay an overland cable from Darwin down to Port Augusta, and then once that happened, Australians would be able to communicate with the outside world in a matter of hours rather than weeks or months.
The overland telegraph was a mammoth feat of engineering, more than 3,000 kilometres through a cruel, barren landscape. Amazingly, it took just 2 years to complete. And this is the substation that was right at the centre of the line, indeed right at the heart of Australia at Alice Springs. And though that little girl might not have realised it, she was standing at the hub of this early mass communication system, because every sentence, every word that any Australian wanted to be read in Europe or Asia or Africa or America passed right through there. Springs Telegraph Station was like a giant central server, and its clicking, clacking, clattering machinery sent and received the world's noisiest emails. When the telegraph line was replaced in 1932, the substation was closed down, and it became a home for mixed-race kids who were taken away from their mums and were forced to live the lives of white kids. Now, in retrospect, this was a pretty horrific social experiment, but it did have one interesting outcome. A little, very bright young boy called Charlie, who was born right here and went on to become Charles Perkins, the first Aboriginal man ever to get a university degree in Australia, and later became one of the most respected campaigners for Aboriginal rights from the 1960s right through to the time that he died. And he once had a football trial for Manchester United. Now, I bet you didn't know that. When you come to Alice Springs, it doesn't take long before you realise that this tiny little dot in the middle of a big red landscape is full of contradictions.
Look at this magnificent boulder-strewn ridge. Lots of lovely gums. And over here, we've got a huge highway and the suburbs. That's Alice for you. But that's where I'm going.
I didn't realise it, but this tiny town is divided into 20 even tinier suburbs. I'm in Braitling, about to relive my feckless youth.
I'm going back to school.
But in typically perverse Alice style, this is no ordinary school.
Ken, you can tell us a bit about The Hobbit, because I know you've been reading it.
Well, Bilbo, the main character, at the beginning of the journey was very timid and nervous.
This School of the Air classroom is about 4 times the size of the entire UK, all up about 1 million square kilometres. Bags not sit up the back.
There's about 25, 26 kids that Joe's talking to, and the furthest away is probably about 1,200 kilometres. The nearest maybe about 100 kilometres away.
We've actually got a special guest come to visit us in the studio today, person who's travelled lots of places all around the world and has finished up here in the middle of Australia in Alice Springs. So I'd like you to welcome Tony Robinson. He's come to have a visit.
Thank you.
Let's see. I can change our camera around with a bit of a push of a button here.
Hi, what's the best thing about this school as far as you're concerned, and what's the worst?
I think the worst thing is probably being like remote and isolated doing school there, and best thing would be we have a tutor in our classroom who is our supervisor.
Back in the 50s, students listened in on crackly radios. Thanks to satellite dishes, I can sit here and put faces to names and reach places I couldn't walk to in 7 days, let alone one.
My question is it harder to find places in Australia because Australia is so much younger than England?
That's a really interesting question. Well, of course, before white people came over to Australia, there's far more occupation than ever in England. England's only been occupied for 10,000 years, whereas Australia, it's 50, 60,000 years, something like that. We're not quite sure yet. So I think as we get more sophisticated in learning how to work out the history of a place, there'll be more and more and more and more history of those early years in Australia. But in 200 years, wham! It's just exploded to such a phenomenal degree. Now that in itself is a brilliant story, and weirdly, of course, you're part of it now. You are one of those stories right now. And you're also incredibly polite. Look, they're all saying, thank you, Mr. Robinson, thank you, too. And thank you too, guys. Thank you very much.
Yep, that's
Bye.
excellent. All right, thanks everyone.
Thank you.
One of the things that really stuck out for me when I was talking to the kids was how polite they are, how articulate they are, and how smart they are. And I reckon at least some of that must be to do with this kind of schooling, because if you think of it, they get far more attention than most kids do and have to give more attention back. So although you might think, oh, isn't it tragic that they're all so far away from each other and they can't interact? Well, maybe, but I reckon there are a lot of pluses to this kind of schooling.
Having left the world's largest classroom, I'm heading for another of Alice's quirky contradictions. Just on the outskirts of town is a tiny derelict piece of the USA.
This little man-made hump in the landscape's very intriguing. In fact, it's more than intriguing. This was at one time of top-secret international importance because it was here where they used to monitor who'd got nuclear weapons and whether or not they were testing them. The business end was down there, of course. Harold, you were in the US forces at the time, weren't you?
I was.
So what was it exactly they were doing down there?
This vault holds a set of seismometers that is used to detect earthquakes and nuclear explosions. And it's a part of the United States Atomic Energy Detection System.
And it really was secret, wasn't it?
Yes. We'd meet people downtown and they'd say, what do you do out there? Oh, we're a weather research station. Yeah.
And even today, a lot of people around here don't know what this place was.
No, they don't.
Can we have a look inside?
We absolutely can. We'll open it up here.
How do we get in? Who opened them?
The ladder, unfortunately, is on this side.
Right, am I going down first?
I guess you're going down first.
Wait. It's very rusty and a little bit scary.
These old bones of mine don't work like they did when they were 20.
Look, these are the things, I guess, where all the seismic detection took place. Harold, how many places like this would there have been around the world, do you reckon?
18, 20, something like that.
All around the
Soviet bloc.
Yeah.
In the early 60s especially, because they were the only people that had nuclear weapons that we were monitoring.
And what was in here?
There was 3 seismometers, one in each tank.
Yeah.
This, as you can tell, this vault's been empty for a long time. Yeah. And it's because modern technology has replaced the old instruments that used to be in here. And we do a better job with newer stuff.
Oh, thank you for sharing it with me. I'll turn this off now and climb my way back up to the surface. Very good to meet you.
Same here.
You know what I find so extraordinary? 40 years or so ago, all that was cutting-edge technology, and now it's as redundant as a cannon from the Crimean War. Such a fast pace our history goes now, doesn't it?
Today I'm in Alice Springs. The little town at the heart of Australia is the last stop on my epic overland and sea walk. I've visited a colonial communications hub, been schooled in the world's largest classroom, and explored a Cold War hotspot. Time for another Alice Springs contradiction, the upside-down Todd River. The dry riverbed, which sits on top of the watercourse, is also home to the oldest continuous single event in the Northern Territory.
It's called Henley-on-Todd, and it involves these things. John, how old is Henley-on-Todd?
Well, it's been running for 53 years. Well, this is the 53rd running of it.
And why is it called Henley-on-Todd?
I think the English people pinched the name from us.
Oh, you mean, yeah. It's
the
taking
Henley-on-Thames.
The Henley Regatta in London.
Yeah. Like its English counterpart, the Henley-on-Todd attracts huge crowds each year. Unlike its English counterpart, Alice's premier social event is entirely lacking in the thing that makes a regatta, water.
This is what we call a sand bike.
Yeah.
It's not really a boat. You can climb into it and you just run along the sand. So it's a bike for the sand. You want to give it a try?
Yeah, have a go. Here we go. Whoa!
You do have to let go, though.
That's better, yeah, wait. Oh, once you get the knack, It's dead easy to break your leg, isn't it? The sand keeps dropping on my head every time I leave. Right, show me another one.
All right, let's have a look at our 12-metre yacht.
Yeah.
So
how many people man this?
12. That's what we call a 12-metre yacht. So you just jump aboard.
Yeah.
So climb aboard.
Yeah.
Then you pick this up.
Yeah.
And then you run in the sand with it. Now, it's fairly heavy, so that's why you need 12 people.
Yeah. And finally, now this is more my thing.
Well, how'd you like to have a ride in one of these?
Oh, I'd love to, yeah.
Well, jump in.
Should we have a race?
Well, we can do. Why don't we do that?
Go
Guys,
race,
have a race with Tony.
Yeah. Okay.
All right, jump on in.
Right, how many of these vehicles, or ships, should I say, are going to take part in this race?
Well, today we just have 2, but usually we have heats of 4.
Yeah. Oh!
Make yourself comfortable.
OK, John, so what are we going to have to do?
What we have to do is we have to run down to the buoys.
Yeah. They've gone! They've gone! Go! Come on! Anyone got any bubble bath? Here we go.
Go that way! Go that
way! Come on! Hey, come on, pick yourselves up. Hey, come on!
Go!
Come on, you go.
We're on the home stretch!
They've collapsed, we're winning!
Stroke!
Come on, number 2.
Stroke!
Oh, brilliant!
Down anchor!
Fantastic! Oh, thank you. Oh, I enjoyed that.
You need to lift out there.
This is living history. Oh, I like that. Thank you for sharing with me some of the finest history of Alice Springs. Cheers, guys.
Cheers.
Bye.
Well, with that rope down, take this over here.
OK, it's taken a while, but I'm hitting the heart of this town. I wonder if Market Day in Todd Mall can throw up something out of the ordinary.
A couple of gorgeous Port Lincoln parrots over there. One of them's clawing away at a sachet of white sugar, probably more calories than a double burger with fries and a shake. Maybe they're breeding a whole new generation of obese parrots. Isn't it funny how and where towns start? There was virtually nothing here at all in the late 19th century, apart from the telegraph and a few prospectors and the odd drunk and a few shacks selling bits and bobs. It wasn't even called Alice Springs in those days. It was Stewart. It was named after the explorer John Stewart, who passed vaguely in this direction. And it wasn't until the late 1920s, when the railway came here, that it was designated the capital of Central Australia. It was still called Stewart, though. It wasn't until 1933 that it became known as Alice Springs. It picked up the name of the settlement down the road. Still, though, very small, very underdeveloped. But the thing that made Alice the Alice Springs we know today was the Second World War. 200,000 armed forces passed through here. Imagine the amount of energy and business and excitement that must have brought here. That's when Alice really began.
Back in the 1940s, it was essentially a staging post for soldiers making the arduous train and truck journey to Darwin and beyond to fight the Japanese further north. I wonder what those diggers would think of Alice now, with its markets and tourists and didgeridoo players.
Yeah.
Hi, Tony.
How do you do?
Good to meet you. Just wondering whether you'd like to connect with your inner didgeridoo-ness.
It's something I've always wanted to do all my life, this, that kind of connection. I wouldn't mind if there's nobody else about.
Have you ever tried before?
No, I haven't, no.
Okay. Awesome sound. Awesome. That's it. Awesome.
That's terrible. Would you play us a piece?
Sure.
Yay! Thank you. Bye!
Clearly my inner didgeridoo didn't, so I'll stick to what I do best.
I'm walking down Hartley Street now, and hang on. What's this? Try our emu, croc and camel. Well, I knew about emu and croc, but I didn't know they served camel round here. Come on. Hello? Hello? Hi.
G'day, mate.
Hi, my name's Tony Robinson. We're doing a series called Tony Robinson's Time Walks. You're...
I'm Crafty, Tony.
Hi, Crafty.
How are you, mate? All right?
Nice to meet
good.
you. Hiya.
Tony's my name.
Very nice
Tony's
name.
well.
I saw outside that you sell things like emu and kangaroo and all that.
That we do, yeah, of course, yeah.
Could I have a taste of something?
Oh, I guess you can. Not a problem, mate. Tony, we've got some tucker there for him. Just come over and...
That's very kind of you. What's this one? What is it?
Crocodile.
Crocodile.
Yeah, crocodile, mate.
Let's have a go.
We would normally serve that in the vol au vent just to evaluate it.
Well, it's a nice sauce, nice vol au vent sauce.
Take your
It
time,
doesn't
mate.
freak me out or anything. What's this one?
That's emu meat, actually.
Oh, can I have a go on
Emu's
that?
a big bird, yeah, by all means, yeah.
Lovely.
You might have to borrow that.
I will,
yeah, by all means.
You haven't got a live tone, have you? Oh, lovely, thanks.
There we go. Oh,
That's
you
great.
No problem.
It's bitterer as a meat, isn't it?
Yeah, no,
It's hot, isn't it?
bit warm.
No.
Plenty of heat in this kitchen normally, mate.
What's this one?
And that's kangaroo meat. Which is a
Kangaroo?
very lean meat, yep. Normally served at medium rare.
It said camel as... Whoa! Hey! That's a big camel, isn't it?
Certainly is. It was actually a baby camel.
A
Weighs
baby?
In, yeah, weighs
Blimey.
in at about 24 kilos.
Oh, that's
normally they weigh in at about 45 to 50, but that's the way it is tonight. So it's a very healthy meat camel.
Which is a very nice
It's
meat.
fantastic.
In the 19th century, imported Afghan cameleers and their beasts were vital to exploration of Australia's harsh interior. When motorised transport took over, many camels were released. Today, their feral descendants are environmental pests.
There's millions of them running around the deserts.
Millions of camels?
Millions of camels, and they've all been introduced. So we're doing our little bit here at the restaurant to serve a very, very healthy meat to our customers.
And balance the environment.
Absolutely, mate. Good on you. Well,
Thanks. I'll have the pavlova next time, all right?
no worries. Enjoy your stay in Alice Springs.
So, bye. See you, mate.
mate. Cheers.
Bye.
What a character.
This is Alice Springs, and I've got good news and bad news. Unfortunately, I'm almost at the end of my second series of walks. The good news is, well, I still have a few surprises up my sleeve.
Come in here. There's something that I want to show you. Can you see this is the Ida Stanley preschool? So Ida Stanley, right? She was this very inspirational teacher who lived around here in the 1920s. Originally, she just taught white children, but she wanted to teach the Aboriginal kids as well. And reluctantly, eventually, she was allowed to do that, although they had to be segregated first of all. And to celebrate her life, this is long after she was dead, they opened a preschool here. Yep, there it is down there, the plaque. And it's the Ida Stanley Preschool Centre, officially opened by Mr. H.V. Moss. Who was H.V. Moss? Well, I didn't know. Certainly nobody around here appeared to know. But we found somebody who does know. Mary, come here. Mary is one of our producers. You know who H.V. Moss is, don't you?
He was my great uncle, and he was a pilot for a long time in the Northern Territory.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your contribution. But the ridiculous thing is that the reason that he opened this preschool is that they looked all around for other celebrities and they couldn't find any. So eventually they said, "Oi, Harry, you open it." So he did. When you come to Central Australia, there's one thing you've just got to see. And according to the locals, it's just down the road. Only just down the road means about 450 kilometres away. So I'm going to take a plane. Look, I know it's Tony Robinson's Time Walks, but don't beat me up. It is the end of the series.
And what an end, eh? For thousands of years, the local Anangu people called this sacred place Nauru. Until some white fella came along and decided to call it Ayers Rock, after South Australia's Chief Secretary, Sir Henry Ayres.
The story of its discovery by Europeans begins in the year 1873, when two expeditions left Alice Springs in order to try and find a way across the central desert and eventually find Perth. One was led by Peter Warburton and the other by William Gosse. Warburton managed to get through to the northwest coast, but it was at tremendous cost. All his camels died, his men were skeleton thin, he was half blinded, and he was still a couple of thousand kilometres from Perth. William Gosse didn't get so far, but in terms of what he found, he was much more successful.
3 months into his journey, he saw this extraordinary formation dominating the landscape. Then, like all good explorers do, he set out to climb it, along with one of his hardy Afghan camel drivers, a bloke called Kamran.
This is what he wrote in his diary. How I envied him his hard feet. He seemed to enjoy walking in bare feet, whereas mine were all blisters, and it was as much as I could do to stand. So which of those two blokes got to the top of that rock first? Was it the one with the dodgy feet or the seasoned bushman? We'll never know for sure, but I know who my money's on. Right, guys, that's a final wrap. Let's go.
That's it, folks. After 10 walks, hundreds of kilometres and heaven knows how many great yarns, I'm hanging up my walking shoes. For now.
You know how you go to a rock concert for the headline act and there's this weird trio playing balalaikas and Jews' harps, and they're the ones that you rock along to? Well, maybe that's just me, but in these walks, that's how it's felt for me. That I've loved the big stories, but actually it's been the funny, odd ones about ordinary Australians, their hopes and their fears and their passions and their failures and their sheer daftness that has remained in my mind. And being here, right in the centre of Australia, buzzing round me like the flies, it feels as though there are all these stories. And the really great thing is, there's a million more yet to be discovered.